Let me talk to you. George here, Catholic Positive Energy. Here's another one for the Goodsaid vibes. Now, I want to talk about something because, well, I have a dear friend who's going through this. They won't be named. Now, the name of this video is Why Isolation is Bad for Human Beings. Now, I've noticed this a lot with some people who I know, and maybe even with myself. Forgive the cough. Now, some human beings, especially adults, if they've suffered something terrible in their life, like the loss of a loved one, or someone very near and dear to them, significant other maybe, we human beings have a tendency to become very devastated, and there's nothing wrong with that in those circumstances, but I've noticed some people have a tendency to isolate themselves, like they want to stay home and never leave. They don't want to interact with people, even people who they normally interact with, like at church. Some people, when they're devastated and pushed over the edge, they just want to stay home and not leave the house when they know that they can. Now, that's normal if you do that for like a few days, maybe. But if you isolate yourself and become an absolute recluse and close yourself off from society when you don't have to, that can become a problem because there are actually some health risks that happen as a result of self-isolation. Here are some of those health risks. I just want to name them here because these are things that I just learned myself, and I want to share them with others. Now, even though I'm not a counselor or psychiatrist or psychologist, and I'm not trying to be, I still feel it's important to share certain information, even through my channel here, because I do care about mental health. I do want to help make a healthy society, human, healthy society, by sharing this important information. Social isolation is bad for human beings because our brains are evolutionarily wired to treat a lack of social connection as a survival threat, triggering chronic stress that harms both our physical and mental health. Here are some physical health dangers to isolation for long periods of time. High stress hormones. Isolation keeps the body's threat detection system active. This causes high levels of cortisol, which breaks down muscle, raises blood pressure, and disrupts sleep. Weakened immune system. Loneliness reduces natural killer cell activity, making it harder for the body to fight off infections and diseases. Heart and stroke risks. Chronic isolation increases inflammation in the blood, raising the long-term risk of heart disease, stroke, and early death. Experts note these health risks match the danger of smoking or obesity. You can review additional data on these risks from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Here's some mental health dangers to isolating oneself. Cognitive decline. Without social interaction to test reality, the brain struggles with focus, memory, and reasoning. Over time, the prefrontal cortex can shrink. Depression and anxiety. Isolation removes emotional stability. This often leads to spiraling negative thoughts, severe depression, extreme anxiety, and higher rates of suicidal ideation. And for those of you who have been following me for several years, I am not one who is in favor of any kind of suicide. And I've done at least 3 broadcasts where I talk about why suicide is unhealthy and why we should never do it, and how to talk people out of suicide. Because I was once in that position myself when I was 16, and I'm glad I didn't do it. I never attempted suicide. I'm not trying to be self-righteous. I'm just saying, so you know. But yes, I would never, if I ever heard that another human being, even if I didn't know them, had suicidal thoughts, I would certainly try to do everything I could to talk them out of it. And trauma and fear. Forced or prolonged isolation mimics the effects of severe trauma, making it very hard to reconnect with others later in life. So, Let me tell a story. I don't think I've said this at all recently, so for those of you who have known me for less than 5 years, you've never heard this before. I'll share it. Now, when I was a kid, I was picked on and bullied a lot in school. And I went to public school, and I absolutely hated it. I was bullied every single day. Like, from the moment I set foot on the school after being dropped off, whether it was from my parents or riding the school bus, I was always picked on, and I never heard the end of it. Usually, I mean, I've been picked on like because what clothes I wear, what shoes I wore. Some people would even make fun of the way I walk, and I didn't even walk funny, but they just wanted to be nasty to me. Here's something I heard a lot for so many years, from the time I was 9 until 14, about how people wanted to beat me up, or about how anybody could beat me up and I couldn't fend for myself. My experiences being in elementary and middle school were an absolute nightmare. So when I got older, by the time I got to high school, I was homeschooled, and it made me so happy. I self-isolated myself when I was a teenager, and at the time I absolutely loved it. And the reason I did, from my point of view at the time, was because I was bullied so much as a kid and traumatized. I didn't want that happening ever again. I was never going to go through that ever again. So I was homeschooled, because obviously I can't get bullied or picked on when I'm homeschooled. If I'm not around anybody, I can't have, the issues or the problems I was having before. So for me, at that time, being isolated was a good thing. But here's something I didn't know. Okay, and I'm admitting this now, because now I'm a substitute teacher at a Catholic school and I work with kids. Here's something I didn't realize. It did cause some problems for me later on in life, because I was alone all the time and I was only around my family. I didn't learn how to properly socialize or interact with people. It stalled. I learned that much later on in life, when I wish I would have learned it sooner, but after being picked on and bullied every day for 5 years, you don't exactly want to be in school. You're not excited, and you don't like being in school. So because I self-isolated myself, I didn't learn how to properly socialize with people until I was much older, which was a few years ago. I honestly feel like I didn't fully understand how to socialize with other human beings in a way that wouldn't be weird or awkward. I don't feel like I learned it until I was 33. And, I knew enough to get by, but I didn't fully understand how to socialize or, learn how to interact with people until I was that old. So, like I say, when I was isolated, it stalled some things in my brain development, psychological development, as far as interacting with others. I wasn't good at it. That was what isolation did to me. So you see, if you're alone all the time, I'm talking from a common sense, okay? I'm not quoting any more things. If you're alone all the time, especially if you're a young person and you're not around people, like especially people your own age, you're never going to learn how to interact with people, and it could very well have a negative effect on you possibly dating or getting married and starting a family if you want those things. You need to learn how to interact with people if you ever want to get married, start a family, or be in some kind of a relationship. And you need to learn how to interact if you want to have friends. I mean, pretty much everybody wants to have friends. We need to have friends. We all need friends, even though we may not want to admit that publicly. We all need friends. Now, I've got the most amazing friends in the world. That's the title of one of my broadcasts that I posted 2 years ago. So, these are the reasons why I strongly recommend no human being should isolate themselves for long periods of time. It's okay if you want to stay home for a day or two because you're devastated and you don't want to be around people. You don't want people to see you sad. You want to keep that to yourself. That's completely healthy. But if you decide that you want to stay home and not see anybody for like years, that's where that becomes unhealthy and it becomes a problem. Here's another thing I want to also emphasize that many of you probably didn't know before. Like, let's say people who are in prison, who are in, in solitary confinement. That's what's more famously known as. You're in isolation for long periods of time. I'm not even so sure if those prisoners are allowed to get an hour in the yard. Based on what I've noticed, they get food brought to them, but they're not allowed to come out of the cell. Usually there is a restroom there, so they never have to leave. But when they're alone for long periods of time, whether it's for a month or years, after a while they're going to go crazy. Now, some of you may not, you may think, well, if I'm just alone all the time, how could that be bad for me? Okay. Well, if you don't see anybody for a long time or talk to anybody for a long time, and you're, like, let's say you're in a prison cell, and you're getting food, you have access to a restroom, but you don't see anybody. You don't talk to anybody. You don't interact with anybody. Eventually, after a while, you're not going to be happy being in that cell and being isolated. You're going to want to get out of there. You're going to want to leave that place. And you may very well want to, as badly as possible, interact with others, because you've been inside a certain space, whether it's your home or someplace. You don't see anybody for a while. Eventually you're like, man, after learning what solitary confinement is like and being out in this beautiful sunshine in the world, interacting with people, having friends, having amazing people in your life, which one of those things is better? I'll let you answer that. Which one of those things is better? Which one of those things would you rather have? Which one of those things sounds healthiest and sounds better for you? I hope now you're understanding the point that I'm trying to make. But yes, I do have some friends who are going through this right now, and in my opinion, and it's okay if people want to disagree with me, I don't take that personally. If you choose to close yourself off and basically put yourself in some kind of solitary confinement, that is not the best possible solution. It's not. Even people who are older and retired and they don't have to work anymore, they probably, stay home and maybe watch daytime television or do what they can, help out in church, go to daily mass, spend time with the grandkids, great-grandkids if they have them. Even some older folks, like, ones who may be confined to a wheelchair, well, they can't really interact with people much, only ones who they may see regularly, like people who take care of them, family members, hospital staff, nurses. They obviously need interaction, no matter how old they may be, no matter what medical problems they may have. Isolation does damage. It really does. And even if you think it doesn't, please research the things I've talked about. That's what I did. It's not hard to Google things and to gain a much better understanding of why this is not good for any human being. But yes, for me, isolation stalled my being able to learn how to socialize with others, how to interact with others without being socially awkward. That's what that isolation did to me, and I wasn't aware of that at the time. And like I say, I don't think anybody has a perfect upbringing, a perfect childhood. I met a lot of people who had much more terrible things happen in their lives than I did, and but still, this was my experience, And this is what I've learned. I need to have friends. We all do. So, let's all be very good friends with those around us and not isolate ourselves at all when we know that we don't need to. I think it's best to talk about things that are bothering you with people you care about who care about you unconditionally and sincerely. That's what I wanted to share today. So, I hope you've learned some very amazing, valuable things, and you're always welcome to, ask me questions or leave comments related to what I've talked about here. And please continue to like, share, and subscribe to Catholic Positive Energy on Facebook and YouTube. And please buy my book on Amazon and especially on GeorgeGoodsaid.com. And please always remember that you're a child of God. Dignification is better than criticism. Live life to the fullest.